indeed second. First, let's over here. All right, Dr. Stephen Goldfinger.
This will keep you organized, because as you'll see, I'll end somewhere in the middle, I have no idea. Speaking for 15 minutes is without question the most challenging part of this for me. First, I'd like to thank Tom, the folks from the Brooklyn Free Clinic, both for doing that work and for putting this together. As I looked over what the topics were for the talks earlier today, I think you can find that this is something a bit different. That when most of the people have talked about the boundaries of science, service delivery, systems of care, that I'm really going to address a very personal kind of question, which is, can you do good and also do well? And let me define the good. I mean the stuff that's probably why you went into health services to begin with. And well, can you have a comfortable living? I think most of us entered the field wanting to do good. What happened subsequently, however, is I chair the chairs meeting, so as I sit and watch the paths, I can tell you an awful lot more time to spend talking about budgets. Being recorded, I shouldn't be so blunt. Than is spent talking about the well-being of the people that we serve. I first started dwelling on this in terms of a talk about actually almost exactly 20 years ago, when I was the Martin Luther King keynote speaker at McLean Hospital, one of the big fancy psychiatric hospitals on the Harvard affiliate in Boston. And of course I got to poke fun at them, because it was like, you've already exhausted all of the faculty of color in the entire medical school. That is like the 5th year, and you've gotten to have me do this already. Martin Luther King wrote, all too many of those who live in affluent America ignore those who exist in poor America. In doing so, the affluent Americans will eventually have to face themselves with the question that Eichmann chose to ignore. How responsible am I for the well-being of my fellows? And later on in The Strength to Love, and for those who don't realize that Martin Luther King is quite a prolific writer, talked about how altruism requires identification and the giving of one's soul. And so what I'd like to do is kind of take you on a little bit of a personal journey and then move it into some broader questions about whether you really can practice medicine in today's era and not lose that soul. Now, I would be lying if I pretended that my path to doing this was clear from the outset. You know, even in retrospect, as I look back, I'm not quite sure why I did all of the things that I did. But my early background was probably not so different from a whole lot of you. I assume most of you are downstate students in one form or another. I grew up on Kings Highway. Actually, my mom finally sold that house about 3 years ago and lived there, essentially her entire life. I went to James Madison High School. I started volunteering in Kings County the summer right after I turned 15 and actually worked there as a volunteer the summers that I was 15, 16, and 18. Strangely enough, the first time that I set foot in my office, the chair's office in psychiatry, was when I was 15 years old. Coming back 17 years when I took the job, it was like a deja vu, except it was actually deja vu. I had been there. It was very strange after 40 almost years away, 30 years away at that time, to come back. I was a great test taker. I was kind of a smart student. Got into Harvard on full scholarship, which I had to be on since my dad at the time installed air conditioners for a living. And in college, now this is to set the stage, this was late 60s, early 70s, people were beginning to explore ethical issues in a much more proactive way. This was the years that the schools were closed because of the student strike over the wars in Southeast Asia. And I got increasingly involved in looking at Buddhism and trying to decide between a career as a physician and a career as a Buddhist monk. Sounds funny now, it really was when I was really serious. I did my undergraduate dissertation on Zen Buddhism and psychoanalysis. And after having been told that I couldn't major in Southeast Asian studies because I can't hear tones, I can remember my Mandarin instructor saying, drop the course. You'll be able to learn how to write. You'll never be able to speak this language. I said, okay, what's the next best thing? And I took a year off. I flew to Istanbul, and I hitchhiked across Asia, first through the Middle East. I mean, I'm one of those rare people who went to Afghanistan as a tourist. And then followed Buddha's footsteps for the bulk of that year across India to Bodh Gaya, up through Nepal and Burma and Thailand, where I realized that, this is a little bit of an open parenthesis, psychiatry talks about transgender disorders, you know, you go into the body of the wrong sex. I kind of sort of really believe that I have a trans-ethnic disorder, that I'm really Thai. I just happen to get this like middle-class Brooklyn Jewish body that I got born into. You know, picture, I'm 21 years old. I just turned 20. No, I wasn't even 21 when I got there. Set foot in Thailand. My exposure was eating in a Chinese restaurant on Avenue U and seeing the King and I. That was my exposure to Asia. And I felt at home. It's 40 years later. I have Godson there. I spend most of my free time there. It's where I'll retire. Southeast Asia is very much a part of who I am and what I think about. The struggle that I had was, do I become a Buddhist monk or do I go to medical school? And I had an epiphany in a, sounds kind of made up, I swear it's true, in an Teakwood monastery in northeast Thailand, where I realized Buddhist practice is about doing the things that you theoretically and spiritually believe in. That my practice wasn't going to take place kneeling in front of a statue. That my practice was going to be about taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. And with that decision made, I came back. There's only one med school in the country I was willing to go to. Thankfully, they took me. Yale. Yale had no grades, no exams, no required courses. You do not want to be treated like somebody who graduated from Yale and wasn't interested. Again, I'm going to take more than 15 minutes. I hope that won't be too terrible. When I went for my knee replacement surgery, the chair of orthopedics, who of course takes care of chair of psychiatry, is like trying to describe what's going on. And I'm like, Bill, you don't understand. I didn't go to anatomy lab except for the torso and above the neck because I thought I'm going to be a psychiatrist. Why would I care about the bones of the knee? I know nothing. Pretend you're talking to somebody who knows, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, because that's about my level of knowledge of the anatomy of the limb. Finished med school and began the search to try to figure out what I was going to do. At the time, I was coming out as a gay man, the only place in the country that was comfortable to live was San Francisco, believe it or not. Even New York was a little bit on the homophobic side. And so I only applied for residencies there, got into UCSF, which was this incredibly psychoanalytic residency. I can give a whole talk just on how that traumatizes people. On the other hand, I could start moonlighting really early on, and so I started working in the psych emergency services. And one of the things that I realized is everything I had learned in medical school and everything I had learned in residency was largely irrelevant to taking care of what was really going on with the people that I was seeing. I knew how to medicate their psychotic symptoms, and I knew what to give them for their depression. But in fact, and I have a great quote in an early article that I wrote about one of my residency colleagues I'm still friends with, he said something like, when a homeless person walks in the door, I want to tear my hair out. I know how to take care of their bodies. I even sort of know how to take care of their minds. No one taught me how to take care of their lives. And in fact, most of the next 15 years of my career was spent trying to deal with these issues of how does one serve the most disaffiliated, the most disenfranchised, the most disconnected, the most discriminated against individuals. I'll cut to the summary answer and then I'll go back to kind of how one gets to the answer. The summary answer is, as best as you can, And in whatever way makes sense to you, knowing that what you're going to choose is not necessarily going to be where you're going to stay. Art Meyerson, who has since retired, is a brilliant community psychiatrist who I've known and admired for years, who sat on President Carter, that's how far back it goes, mental health commission, and talked about how, the psychoanalyst maybe will be seeing 20 patients a week, and they think they're going to change them this much. That he sat on the committee that decided Social Security disability payments. And the fact that he could get that up by $40 a month, that he was changing this many lives this much. And so I think that one of the questions is, where do you begin on that giant level? And is it rewarding? What's it like? What are the alternatives? So I started out very much on the front line. My specialty early on was self-mutilating borderline patients. For those who haven't done psychiatry, those are the people who hate you today, love you tomorrow, the kind of really, probably all of you have dated one somewhere along the way. And it was very, very intense work. Can I pretend it was all altruism? It wasn't all altruism. It was kind of cool to be the guy who took care of the patients everyone else hated, no one wanted to see. And I think part of why I could do it was the Buddhist core, so that ultimately I really could say to myself, you're going to live, or you're going to die. All I can do is help you along the path and do what I can. Your fate isn't in my hands. And so I couldn't be blackmailed the way many people doing that kind of work, or I'm on the window that if you don't come, I'm going to jump. Jump, and worse, I'm going to get sued for letting them jump. Mine, tomorrow I'll still be here, and I'll still talk to you if you're alive. If you jump, I'll feel bad if you do it thinking you're going to get your little last laugh, because you're not going to be around to laugh. Why don't you just show up in the ER? My first job after the residency was running the ER for San Francisco County. So that one answer is you can work with these people because it makes you kind of special. I would say that working with particularly homeless people, how many of you actually work in the frequent? Those who can't, in their space, you should. It's life-changing. It both helps you realize that people that you think of as them aren't them. They're really just a variety of us. And of course there's this could happen to me tomorrow. Now there aren't all that many, homeless doctors. But there are a few floating around. I found eventually that what I wanted, I think I left down. There was one quote, that for me, it became less fulfilling to work with individuals because it felt like my diagnosis was always a system problem. One of the earliest papers that I wrote was on system resistors or treatment resistors. People will label treatment resistant. How many of you heard somebody talk about that? This is a treatment resistant patient. And then you say, well, what's the treatment? They're going to wait in line in the Kings County ER for 9 hours being told that they're not sick enough to be seen while they're there with their kids who are watching people with stab wounds being rolled in. And then they walk out the door and now they're resisting an appointment, and so they go to the bottom of the list for the next scheduled evaluation. That I really became more interested in setting up systems of care. And so moved to working first street outreach, but in part to learn, not a chance. I just got the 2 minutes I worked in trouble. The systems of care and setting up healthcare for the homeless in San Francisco. The next, and those kinds of activities that have population impacts can be profoundly rewarding. Getting to try to change some of the underlying core issues affecting people. Lately, I'm a department chair. I must say, half of the time, I feel like what I really should have done is the finance. Yeah, To business school, I am crunching numbers and budget sheets and relative value units, etc. On the other hand, I think what I'm doing is sliding along the Ott-Myerson fulcrum, now trying to change a larger number of people's lives a little bit more, so that we have the only residency in the United States where every single psychiatry residency, resident at downstate, works in a homeless shelter. There are hundreds of residencies. The fact that no one else has said, this is a skill set that somebody ought to have, or at least some of the people ought to have, and that in fact, a few of the people get converted. You know, I meet with virtually, these days, it's been education that's been my focus. If I can take of our 12 residents, 8 of them and turn 8 of them on this much about public psychiatry and 1 of them on this much, they will go on and teach. The medical students that I interact with and those who are planning on going into psychiatry will find my door is open. It's easier if you wait until you're 3, but I see everybody from all years. And begin to turn them on to the concept that you don't have to have the office in Park Avenue with matching Eames chairs and 2 abstract paintings on the wall, that you actually can do home visits, work in alleyways. I think what I'm going to cut to is when the glasses have to come out. Unfortunately, getting old sucks, and that's true no matter what you science career. One of the patients that I met when I was doing street outreach in San Francisco ended up writing an autobiography. It's pretty rare that somebody who works with homeless schizophrenic folks gets to have a patient who writes an autobiography. I'm going to read it because it'll give you a sense of, I think, both an approach and the rewards. But still, narcissism doesn't entirely go away, even if it's mostly gratifying. I sank lower still. My home was an alley shared with 2 to 3 other men and hundreds of imagined creatures, theirs and mine. One evening, a short, thin man, you can tell it's a long time ago, with big round eyes, intruded into the space that I occupied. What do you think you're doing here? No, what do you think you're doing here? He said, as if he had a right to be there and I did not. The police are rounding up street people tonight. Do you want to get sent to jail? I'd never had my space so invaded by anyone, not even by other homeless men. I was addled and angry. Who the fuck do you think you are, Jesus Christ? I growled. No, he said, extending his hand. Steve Goldfinger. I'm a doctor who can put you in a place where you can get things sorted out. If nothing else, you'll have a bed and a few hot meals for a couple of days. Medicine too, I asked, for I knew well what happened in hospitals. Yeah, but I won't turn you into a vegetable, he answered, understanding the reasons for my concern. I'm known here, I whispered conspiratorially. If you agree to go with me, I'll need your promise and no one will be called. I promise everything will be confidential. Will you let me admit you voluntarily? I won't read the rest, but I think that I look back and I think, that's a life that I touched. Interestingly, he went on to respond to meds, and he was Hillary Clinton's mental health advisor during her first Senate campaign. So that one can find people living in circumstances that no one would believe they're going to ever come out of, and end up having profound influences on policy. That's one place to stick the lever. The other is one that I hadn't thought about much before, but research. I had a very, very large, I went back to Harvard following a partner who got into Harvard Med School, stupidly wanted to go there, and had a large, like $13 million grant to study housing homeless people and set up housing that the people living there ran. These were all people with schizophrenia, 70% substance abusers, 70% with jail histories. And they got to vote on who the staff were and what the rules were. I never really thought research mattered too much. Mostly research was things people did in laboratories with rats and test tubes, and if you were lucky, drug trials, and came to realize that academics can also influence things, that changing the knowledge base Here was the great finding, $13 million it took them to find this. If you take long-term, mentally ill, alienated, jailed, homeless people, and you give them safe and affordable housing, 3 years later, 90% of them are still in the housing. $13 million, and I learned that housing cures homelessness. The people still have the same symptoms they did before. Now I feel like, what was the contribution? Yes, I changed it, and as you noticed, it's been implemented, so now we provide housing for everyone, you're right. But 112 people who hadn't had a place to call their own now have a place to call their own. Okay, since I didn't really, graciously extended time, let me kind of go back to the, can you do good and do well? I think so. When I hear them talk about, well, you got the new leadership at Downstate. Well, you can get rid of those docs in your department making $400,000 or $500,000 and not doing anything. I can at least look around and go, ain't no one in psychiatry. Not that nobody's not doing anything, but nobody's making $400,000 and $500,000. On the other hand, we won't starve. So that you certainly can do well. Can you do good? Every time that I hear from one of my residents graduated 10 years ago with a story about someone they took care of, I know that I'm doing good. And so in closing, I'll give you the two threads that I really bring together. One is the Hinayana philosophy. Hinayana Buddhism says, please, if any of you are Hinayana Buddhists, I'm giving you the ultra short version. Even when you're in the position to be able to leave the cycle of birth and death and achieve nirvana, you can't do so unless you brought everyone else along with you. And from my other tradition, the Jewish tradition, a quotation from the Talmud, which is, you are not required to complete the task, but neither are you permitted to put it down. And so I hope that gives you some sense of, can you continue this work later into your life? Damn straight you can. And you can have a wonderful, wonderful time doing it. So thank you.